So we just put a house under agreement and got 10 offers on it. So pretty clearly the buyers are definitely out. But it's also pretty clear that buying in 2020, especially at this time of the year, as we're kind of coming to grips with what coming out of this current pandemic is different than before. I thought we'd look at exactly what it means to be a buyer in 2020. Hi everybody, Marcus Collins here, from the MA Properties Online team with another episode of Martini Monday. This week I thought I would, in true Bond style, come up with a Vesper, shaken not stirred of course, so cheers, and so let's sit back and talk a little bit about what buying in 2020 is all about. Really good. Okay, just as I said in the introduction, we put a home on the market this weekend. We had 10 offers on that home, 17 plus private showings. We also did an open house. I have virtual open houses, it turns out. I have more to talk about open houses, quite what that means in a few minutes. But I thought it would be a good opportunity to really talk about things around buying in 2020 and exactly what that means. What does it mean for you if you're a buyer looking to buy in this market? What should you expect? How are the protocols different? I thought we kind of look at all of that. First off, though, I'm going to kind of run this graph. Many of you have seen this graph before if you've been kind of listening to what myself and Danny have been talking about around the market, kind of back to normal. Looking at the last 5 or 6 days data, it does look like the number of confirmed cases, which is the orange bar in this graph, is actually declining quite steadily. So that's clearly very good news. As well as that, of course, the number of people who die because of this is also on the decline and has been for a while. So all of that's really good news. And I think, as I've said before, really not up to me to say quite what coming out of this will mean, but I think we will see a change as we get to that kind of middle of the month with the state beginning to kind of open up. Having said that, looks like the buyers are kind of preempting this a little bit like they preempted the lockdown. They slowed down before the lockdown came in, and it looks very much as if they're beginning to come back into the market as we're beginning to think about raising that lockdown. So they're kind of ahead of the market in many respects, the state lagging where buyers currently are. So it's worth looking at. Worth also remembering, I haven't updated this data from a week or so ago. I'm going to wait till next week to see quite how the number of listings in 2020 is tracking in comparison to 2019. You've seen this before. Blue is the number of listings in 2019. The orange is the number of listings in 2020. Next week, I want to have an update of this and get some real data in that May timeframe to see how May is tracking with respect to what we saw in 2019. My gut is it is, at least looking at the data so far, we'll see what the second half of the month brings, but certainly looking at the data so far and my predictions for what the rest of this month and perhaps 2020 will look at, looks kind of accurate. I do think we will see more. This was my projections from a week ago. I do think we will see more listings coming on in May than I originally predicted, just because many agents, ourselves included, are beginning to see that pickup in activity from the buyers. And if the buyers essentially call the shots here, so as the buyers come into the market, so we're coming back into the market with more and more listings. So I think my projection is a little low for May. We will see when we kind of get the half month numbers to see quite how it's tracking in terms of what's happening in May. I think it's fair to say, though, that June and July will still be peak months for the number of listings coming on the market. So that's kind of key to take a look at. In terms of how we show, when we show, again, you've seen this graph before, but it's a little bit different now in that I think what we're going to see is those open houses, and I have more to talk about those actually in the next section, beginning to kick in that kind of May, June timeframe. I think we'll begin to see perhaps not the open houses we know of from the past, but certainly open houses kicking in that kind of mid-May and rising as we go through end of May and June and on. So I think we'll see open houses coming back into play here. To say I should put the recipe for this one under in below, because it's really quite good. A little bit strong, which is why it's shaken as opposed to stirred. Shaken means it's kind of a little bit watered down, but still, even though it's been watered down, it's a really nice, somewhat strong cocktail. So that's how I think showings are going to happen. They're going to ramp up. Open houses is going to ramp up in that kind of June, July timeframe. So let me talk a little bit about what's happening with open houses, because we have some real challenges with it, actually. We have two types of open houses. We have the virtual open house and then the physical open house. The virtual open house, actually I have a video here, I think I've got, which kind of shows you really what that virtual open house is all about. I kind of run it over and I'll do a little bit of a talk over it, but essentially it's an agent. In this case, it's me. Danny gave the introduction to the open house. I was actually at the open house, and so I was there giving a running commentary about features about the home, what's interesting, close look at the kitchen. In fact, why don't I just kind of kick it off?
Good, thank you.
In a sense, move forward a little
Beautiful
bit.
day here in Concord.
Here we go. I'll bring the volume down so you don't need to listen to me. You can go listen to my commentary. So we're outside the home. This was a couple of weeks ago, a home we have still on the market in Concord. There it is. And so I'm giving a kind of running commentary about the home. The prospective buyers who perhaps watching this on Facebook Live or as a Zoom webinar, that's how many agents are doing them. You register before the event and then you get sent a link and then you can watch the event as it's happening live. You can ask questions of us while we're in there. We can kind of react to those. They're typed questions as opposed to verbal questions. But certainly, we have somebody who's actually sat where I am right now in our dining room here in Lexington, looking at those questions and then telling me, you should do this, you should do that, show me the kitchen, how big are those closets, whatever kind of question the buyer has, I will then kind of follow them through. So that's the virtual open house. It's pretty good, I have to say. Having watched a few of those, we've done about 6 of those now. I've watched some of them, and I think it does give you a feel. Take some practice to do it slowly and not kind of, just rush through it, gently move it through without making the prospective watcher get very seasick. But that's kind of the virtual open house. We've had a little bit of success with that, although I'm surprised we haven't had more, actually, as I say. Actually, let me go back to this now. The little bit of a challenge, though, it's not as interactive as we would like. The format of the webinar is not fantastic. We've done it with 2 people. We can flip back and forth between somebody who's here answering questions, somebody's physically at the house showing you around. We're going to switch up the format, start pushing it out on Facebook. I think that's probably the platform where most people see our open houses. So this weekend we're going to change that format slightly. Hopefully changing that format will make it a little bit more interactive, which is really what we want it to be. It doesn't really want to be the Marcus show as I walk you around the house. We want it to be much more interactive. So we're going to try that this weekend. The big challenge, though, we face with virtual open houses is all of the systems that we have cannot differentiate. So a Zillow, a Trulia, a Redfin cannot differentiate between a physical open house and a virtual open house. And so what happens is we advertise a virtual open house, but lo and behold, unsurprisingly, real people turn up. So that kind of gives us that sense that very much the buyers are able and willing, perhaps a better word, to actually go to those open houses. So that's the real challenge. None of the systems that we have today are really capable of, say, differentiating between that virtual and that physical open house. And that's a real challenge for us. It's a real challenge not for us, but for everybody, really. And so what's happening is that many people are actually turning up for the open house. And there, the protocols vary wildly, actually, it's fair to say. In some cases, an agent will not let you in. It's a virtual open house, therefore I won't let you in. In some cases, you will be given a 5, 10, 15-minute slot to look around the home. Perhaps one group will be on the second floor, one group will be on the first floor, another group will be in the basement, and the agent who's hosting the open house will try and be the gatekeeper, if you will. I have to say, I don't think it's very satisfying for the buyers. They really get a rather constrained amount of time in the house. And in my perspective, the best way to view that home is clearly to organize a private showing. And we, the agents, need to get better at organizing that so that you can be there with your agent, or perhaps we can help you with that too, and show you around the home. That's the way we want to go. So as you turn up for an open house, if you're expecting what you had previously, it's not going to be that way. And it's a little bit of a potluck to some extent in terms of what the protocol will be when you actually turn up. Certainly expect that you're going to be in a queue, depending on how many people there are clearly at the open house. And I think the number of people at open houses will increase over time. As we kind of move into end of May and June, more and more people will expect to go to those open houses. It's highly likely that there'll be a queue outside with the agent being a kind of gatekeeper, giving you a restricted amount of time as you go into that. So be cautious about that. Certainly have that in mind when you go into a home, to an open house. It may not necessarily be what you expect. And speaking of what you'd expect, we've seen, I've had some commentary from some buyers around this idea of virtual staging. Some of you may have seen, you may see in MLS or on Zillow, you may see a note under the photograph to say this home was virtually staged. What that means is they took the photographs and they put furniture into it as part of a Photoshop exercise. The challenge is, of course, that when you turn up for that open house, that furniture isn't there. It's not real. It's virtual furniture. And that can be somewhat disappointing. You go in, you expect to see a layout, expect to understand what the layout of the room is, but it's a blank canvas, and that's always been very challenging. From our perspective, many vacant homes we always physically stage because we really do think that's kind of key in terms of you being able to understand how you would live in the space. Where we've got an occupied home, in almost all our cases, in fact all our cases, the buyer has left for an extended period. We've perhaps come in and staged, we've supplemented that staging. So we do think that going into a home that's got furniture is much more satisfying and allows you to kind of sense how you would be in that home. So I wanted to touch on open houses, and that change in protocol is very different to what you would ordinarily expect. Virtual staging is going to give you a surprise as you walk in. You're expecting to see furniture because I saw that in the photographs, but actually physically it's not there, which, as I say, is actually the most important piece of staging. It's not really to put it in the photographs. It's really, as you go in there, you can begin to kind of visualize the space that's around you, and think about how you would live in that space. So a couple of kind of gotchas, if you will, in terms of, is it a real open house? Is it a virtual open house? Is it actually staged? Can I actually see what's in the home? Or is it actually a blank canvas and I've still got to use my imagination when I actually get there? So a couple of things to think about there as you turn up to those open houses. I want to touch on a couple more things. And it's really around this idea of the inspection, in terms of what's possible, what's not possible. As I mentioned previously, 10 offers on a home this weekend. That's a competitive situation, and many buyers will think, do I want to do a pre-inspection? Do I waive the inspection? But still, that idea of how do I manage inspections in this environment is an important one to think about. How do I do that? That's kind of a little bit of a challenge for prospective buyers. We've had some situations where the inspector will only allow perhaps one, maybe two people with them in the inspection. So it's not like before. In some cases, the inspector doesn't allow anybody with them, and you will just get the report at the end of the day. that's far from satisfying, I think it's fair to say. I mean, one of the key benefits of clearly of the inspection is you go around with the inspector. Yes, you find out the issues with the home, but the inspector starts explaining all kinds of things. How do you change the air conditioning filter, for example? They almost always talk about that. And you're missing that in many cases, in that you're getting just a report of what is right or wrong about the home, but you're missing those kind of nuances about how do you do this, how do you do that. And that I think is disappointing, but something you have to kind of bear in mind. And that's where, as you're walking around a home with your buyer's agent, make sure you ask a lot of questions. You can't necessarily assume that when you do it with the inspector, that the inspector is going to be there explaining everything. Ask your buyer's agent, show me where the air conditioning system is. How do I change the filter in this air conditioning system? Just get a sense of the major systems in a home, because you may not get that with an inspector. So kind of make full use of that private showing. As I said before, open houses are a little bit fraught in terms of how they're organized, and in some cases somewhat confusing. So make sure you have a private showing. Make sure you go to the house, you look at the home, and you ask the questions. You've got a limited amount of time in that home, potentially. So make sure you make full use of that. Look at all the virtual stuff beforehand so you know the layout of the home, and have your questions organized before you kind of walk in the home. That's really important. You've really got to rely on your kind of extended team, and just bear in mind you're not going to have the time that you would ordinarily have in there with your buyer's agent, with your inspector. Come in forewarned or forearmed with your questions, and make sure you get answers to those questions as you're going through. We're asking all our sellers to fill in a seller's disclosure. They don't have to. The law says they don't have to. That's something to look at too. Make sure you ask your buyer's agent for that seller's disclosure. Is there a seller's disclosure? Make sure you look carefully through it. All of that will help you to get an understanding of that home in what will be a rather compressed period that you're in there. So that's what I wanted to cover in this Martini Monday. Discussion around where we are in terms of the buyers. As I say, the buyers are out, so bear that in mind. As you go out, it can be, and potentially will be increasingly moving forward, a somewhat competitive situation until such times as we get to that June-July timeframe, when we can expect the number of listings to increase. So bear that if you're out and about today looking at homes. It may well be a very competitive situation. Something to bear in mind. Open houses, very confusing. Are they virtual? Are they physical? Am I going to try and ask your agent, ask the listing agent, is this a physical open house? Can I actually go there? If so, how? Or is it a virtual open house? And if it's a virtual open house, how do I get access to it? Is it like we're doing on Facebook Live? Can I just get on our Facebook our Facebook page and look at the open house? Have a look at that. It's very important to do that. Then we get to inspections. I mean, virtual staging, I should say. That's kind of be prepared for, gosh, it looked like this in the photos. Oh, actually, there's no furniture in the house. That can be a little bit disappointing. Bear that in mind as you walk in. That may well be the case. To see that, it's hard to tell from the photos. The visual staging is very good today, but clearly when you turn up, there's nothing there. Also look at the video and the 3D tour. It's much more difficult to put staging into the 3D tour than it is to Photoshop it into a photograph. So look at that 3D tour if there is one. You'll see then whether it's actually going to be a vacant home or whether it will actually be physical staging furniture there. And then finally that inspection, a little bit shorter, different from what you've done before, perhaps hands off to some extent. Make sure when you're actually looking at a home, you come with your questions and get those questions answered while you're there, and if not while you're there, make sure your agent asks the listing agent to make sure you get all of those questions answered before you actually put your offer in. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and cheers, and hopefully that was an informative Martini Monday. We'll be back next week. Excuse me, we'll be back next week for another topic. I want to take a little look at the where we are in terms of my projections next week. So that's what we'll cover next week. So until we get there, I'll wish you a safe week. If you are out doing open houses this weekend, enjoy. We've got a number of properties coming on the market this week. Lots of virtual open houses for myself and Danny to do. So feel free to check those out on our Facebook page. and we'll see you again next week.